This morning's epistle lesson comes from 1 Corinthians chapter 1, verses 18 through 31, which can be found on page 166 in your pew Bibles. Let us together listen for the voice of the Lord. For the message about the cross is foolish to those who are perishing, but to us who are being saved, it is the power of God. For it is written, I will destroy the wisdom of the wise, and the discernment of the discerning I will thwart. Where is the one who is wise? Where is the scribe? Where is the debater of this age? Has not made foolish the wisdom of the world? For since in the wisdom of God, the world did not know God through wisdom, God decided, through the foolishness of our proclamation, to save those who believe. For the Jews demand signs, and the Greeks desire wisdom, but we proclaimed Christ crucified, a stumbling block to Jews and foolishness to Gentiles, but to those who are the called, both Jews and Greeks, Christ, the power of God and the wisdom of God. For God's foolishness is wiser than human wisdom, and God's weakness is stronger than human strength. Consider your own call, brothers and sisters. Not many of you were wise by human standards. Not many were powerful, and not many were of noble birth. But God chose what is foolish in the world to shame the wise. God chose what is weak in the world to shame the strong. God chose what is low and despised in the world, things that are not, to reduce to nothing things that are, so that no one might boast in the presence of God. He is the source of your life in Christ Jesus, who became for us wisdom from God, and righteousness, and sanctification, and redemption, in order that, as it is written, let the one who boasts, boast in the Lord. The word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. As far as foolish things go, this may not seem all that bad on the surface. In fact, if you were going to make a list of foolish things, from most foolish to the least foolish, you might not even think about putting it on the list at all. I mean, things like jumping out of a hayloft at your best friend's house over and over and over again would definitely be close to the top of the list. Not that that ever happened on one or more than one occasion. There's no photographic evidence. Or wading through and playing around the running water in a spillway, especially when you were explicitly told not to by your mom. Or riding a radio flyer red wagon down a steep hill with your siblings while none of you were wearing a helmet. Or climbing out on the roof through your bedroom window. Yeah, these things, if they actually ever really happened, would definitely rank high up on the foolish things I may have done list. Oh, and of course, there are other things, even for this chronic rule follower, that would automatically be high up on the list. But this, when you give it any thought at all, really may be the most risky and foolish thing that any of us ever do. And what is it? Well, it's something about which we really have no choice in the matter at all. The most risky and foolish thing we do every day is be human. Think about it. Consider the risks involved, the potential peril we face in just being us, the intimacy our relationships take, the vulnerability involved in allowing ourselves to love others and be loved by others. Putting ourselves out there in the world to build, to create, to engage, to discover, to journey, to grow. The human endeavor, this life we all live, is full of incalculable risk. Yes, indeed. Of all of the things that we have ever done, this is the most foolish. but it is also the most beautiful and most rewarding. Who would have it any other way? Why would we want it to be anything else, even if we could choose for it to be? For even on our worst days, even in the midst of the struggle, even at our most foolish, there's something potent, powerful, and magnificent about being. In our text from the beginning of 1 Corinthians, the Apostle Paul writes to his audience in ancient Corinth about a foolishness that is wiser than the wisdom of the ages. This foolishness of which he writes is rooted in a God who chooses the way of suffering, the way of humility, the way of incarnation where divine becomes flesh and shares a life like ours. God who, in the person of Jesus Christ, takes on the risk of peril, the challenge of intimacy, the vulnerability of the human experience, the dangerous proximity that love demands, to a world that made a practice of fashioning divine beings who crave power, thirst for vengeance, hunger for retribution, and use humans as pawns for their own joy and privilege and purpose, to a world that fashioned gods in their own image. To this world, to our world, this message of God coming down to dwell in this messiness as human, to have a fully human experience with all of its joys and sorrows, pains and delights, is absolutely absurd. It's utter foolishness. The Greco-Roman world in which Paul wrote and where he was schooled and where he lived, and the environment into which Jesus himself was born, was a world that was established on the framework of honor and shame. This was the code of life. It was how everyone made a name for themselves, and more importantly, for those they served. All of the tasks one undertook were considered under the calculus of whether it would bring honor or whether it would lead to shame. And making note of someone else's motives or actions might lead to your own advancement in such a culture. Therefore, no one would voluntarily take on a lowly estate. And anyone who would do such a thing would be perceived to be a fool. It just wasn't the way of the world. It wasn't the way of power. It wasn't the way of an ancient influencer, if there was such a thing. It wasn't the way to be remembered, to be immortalized in stone for all time. Consider then what it might mean to those in this world to which Paul wrote, that a God would take on the human experience, giving up all that humanity imagined that the divine should or even must possess to be considered divine, to fully dwell with humanity in order that humanity might be somehow redeemed, made complete. Such a message contradicts and serves as the ultimate foil for the perceived wisdom of the wise and the discernment of the discerning. In a world with a pantheon of gods whose powers were often feared and sometimes even despised, and were on display for all to see through the unending struggle of their human vassals, a God who would purposefully condescend, come down, to participate as fully human in the human experience, not as some kind of trick or ploy or game, but as an act of mercy and love. That would be preposterous. And friends, it indeed is. And it may be one of the most compelling reasons to believe in its veracity. It's just so absurd. And then, as if all of that wasn't outlandish enough. To think that this one to whom Paul had pledged his life and devotion, and about whom he preached and wrote, would die a humiliating public death on a Roman cross is absolute foolishness or folly, to use Paul's words. The cross was the ultimate sign of power of the empire that perfected this cruel form of capital punishment. It was all about violence and control. It was an effective way to bring the masses into obedient submission, reminding them to whom they were to pledge their ultimate allegiance. Sound tragically familiar? Yet this God, this Christ, this one named Jesus, to whom Paul bore witness, died on the cross, revealing to the world the futility of violence and the ultimate failure of imperial power. This God, this Christ, this one named Jesus, experienced the fullness of what it means to be human, even to the point of death, so that everyone might come to know the beauty of our human existence, to redeem this earthly life and even our death from the perceived futility of it all. For not even the cross could keep a God of love, a God who is love, down. Not even state-sanctioned violence could eliminate love and the power of hope. That which was understood to be utter humiliation became the ultimate sign of the one who chose to experience the fullness of what it meant to be human, showing the world a different way, a way that leads to life, of strength in weakness, of wisdom in perceived foolishness, a way where the first shall be last and the last shall be first, a way that is the upside-down economy of the gospel. That, my friends, is the resurrection life. All of this is foolishness and folly if one is looking for a God who is distant and detached. It is foolishness and folly if one is searching for a God who dwells apart from our own existence, somewhere out there, directing our every move as some grand puppet master. It is foolishness and folly if one is longing for a God who is unaffected by our very humanity and the lives we live. But that is not the God of love, the God who is love. And in reality, if we are honest, love is always more than a bit foolish, isn't it? Love goes beyond platitudes and plunges into the depths of what it means to be human. Love enters into life even, or perhaps I should say especially, in the muck and mire. Love is engaged. Love is affected. Love is involved. Love is vulnerability. Love is risky. And this is what God does. And this is the foolishness toward which God calls each one of us. So what does all of this mean? What does this upside-down life look like in our here and now? It's meant what it's always meant. Our weakness is strength. Through it, we can relate to one another. Our vulnerability is courageous because we can find one another through it and connect to one another because of it. Our real, raw, human existence is brave, beyond imagination and comprehension. This life, this way of God in the flesh, the way of the God of the cross, The way of the God of resurrection is characterized by humility. Humility that seeks justice and loves mercy, not as a path to fame or recognition, but for the sake of others and as an end in itself. This life, this way of love, flows out of the one who is love. And it is a life where the poor in spirit inherit the kingdom of heaven. Those who grieve, those who mourn because of love lost, will be comforted. The gentle, the ones who are humbly themselves, will understand that they are already everything they need to be. Those who hunger and thirst for a way that leads to beauty will find fulfillment, for they will see it everywhere and in everyone. The ones whose hearts are open to the divine will behold the very face of God all around them. The people who pursue peace, shalom, wholeness, completeness, not just for themselves, will come to understand that all others are indeed the beloved of God. And all of this happens not through effort, not because of anything any one of us do, but because of and through the one who became the foolishness of the world to reveal true wisdom to us all. It is not based on achievement, as if this is some kind of meritocracy. No. This is the beauty of the gospel. This is all because of the God who made all things possible and who calls us all to live into the kingdom of heaven, which, friends, is already here. And here's the challenge that's before us. Are we willing, as a church and as individuals, to live into this life of faith in a manner that embodies the way of love for everyone? Are we willing to act with justice, to be merciful, and to walk humbly so that our very lives become a reflection of the radical, all-encompassing grace of God? Friends, the question is, are we willing to be foolish together? God knows that the world needs it. And to God be the glory. Amen.